In 2020, Square Enix finally released the remake of Final Fantasy VII. Now, it was Resident Evil 2 remake that popularized this remake trend that is still going on to this year. And the remake for 7 itself was dating all the way back to the PlayStation 3, where there was a very impressive opening cutscene for the game that got everybody hyped. And as like you look back on it, it is pretty impressive for a PS3 game. And it took them until the PlayStation 4 generation and now the PS5 with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to really realize this remake. And I suspect that the third part of the remake will come out within the next 2 to 3 years, if not sooner. So, I as I indicated in another video of mine, I'm sort of on the fence with these remakes. A lot of them have been really great and have had a lot of passion and respect for the original. However, if you were to ask me, would I prefer Final Fantasy 17 over these remakes? I'd pick moving the series forward. But that being said, if the remakes are going to be this good, I'm not going to be completely against them. And as long as it doesn't feel like a soulless cash grab, which I think that most of the companies that have done stuff like this have mostly avoided. I think the closest we've gotten is with Resident Evil 3 Remake, and even that game I still really like. But with Final Fantasy VII Remake, it takes the first 10 hours of the original game and expands it into a full Final Fantasy game, a full 30 to 40 hour game, depending on how you play. And it could be even longer if you try to do everything, especially if you do New Game Plus. But it follows the adventures of Cloud, Strife, Tifa, Barrett, and Aerith during their meeting hours in the original game, which I, again, said that takes about 10 hours. So the best and worst thing about this game is that it extends everything. So it really takes its time with the characters, especially characters that don't get a lot of screen time in the original, like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. They get a lot more screen time and a lot more time to know them, so that way, when they have their own story beats, it's more meaningful. And I think it strengthens the main character, the main four characters as well. However, there are moments in this game that do seem to overstay their welcome. There are there's parts that just feel way too long, like they're trying to run out the clock. And to me, it I don't know. Like, I appreciate the extra story beats, but there are times where there are certain dungeons that go on for way too long, and you're ready to move on to the next chapter. And the optional side quests are fun, and there is a reason to do them because it affects the game depending on how many you do and certain quests that influence the main story. But speaking of gameplay, bouncing off of side quests, the gameplay is really fun. Like, it's a blast. I was on the fence at first during the first couple hours, but once I got used to the battle system, I loved it. So the battle system is a mix of turn-based and active, which I didn't necessarily think was possible. So if you take 13, 15s, and the original 7's combat, that's basically what you get in Remake. So you can button mash like you do in 15, where you command your characters to attack like you would expect in a normal action RPG. But you can also take the time to insert commands, and time slows to where you can tell certain party members to cast spells, use limit breaks, potions, etc. And it's a really neat way of sort of meeting in the middle, because fans have been asking for the return to turn base, and I think that this is a good way to do it going forward. And I'm excited to see if they implement it with Final Fantasy 17 at all, or if it's just going to be strictly for the 7 remakes. But the it's an absolute blast. Like I really like the option of being able to switch between characters. Frankly, Tifa, just like in the original, was my favorite. She's the most fun and she feels the most powerful. It's just like with her being a boxer, it's just a blast to punch people and jump around and do all these somersaults. And then Cloud would be a close second. I think the weakest for me was probably Aerith. I feel like I hope that in Rebirth that they really expand her ability, or her healing abilities. Not that any of them were necessarily bad, but I really enjoyed how that played out, and it did add an element of strategy, and it didn't just feel like mindless action. Like I still had to think about what I was doing at times. I think the boss fights are really epic. The Hell House being my personal favorite, and then I would say my biggest criticism, besides the other ones, is sometimes the random encounters feel kind of monotonous. Like there's no real danger. Like I mean, in the older games, you could potentially be taken out by a random encounter. In these newer Final Fantasy games, it's not nearly as much as a risk. It just feels more like padding than anything else. But speaking of originals, 7 is iconic for its mini games. Even within the opening 10 hours, there's these extra mini games with the motorbike and then the squats, and then there's also like a barrel pushing thing when you're saving Aerith in the church. Those were hit or miss for me. The dartboard mini game was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed the squats too, and then the motorcycle mini game, which appears twice in the game, is okay. But there were a couple of them that were added to the game that I didn't particularly care for. They were just okay, but they felt janky like an old PS1 game, and I don't know if that was on purpose or not. I would imagine not. But it in a way, it added to the charm, if you will. And I think that's ultimately what this game's purpose is. It's not to replace the original 7. So I think if you've stayed away from Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I don't think that this is going to hurt the original at all. Like, I really don't. I think it complements it, if anything else. Like, it's not like Square's going to send out an EMP that erases all copies of Final Fantasy 7 from existence, so you have to play the remake. That's just impossible. So I think no matter what, how you feel about the remake, the original will always still be there to play. And while I prefer the original, I think that this is a good companion to sort of flesh out the characters and to spend more time in this world that I really love. Final Fantasy VII is my second favorite Final Fantasy game, so seeing these characters in a new but also familiar light was a lot of fun. And there were even some surprises here and there throughout the story. Like there's obviously familiar beats that really tickle your nostalgia, but there's also plenty of surprises that I don't think breaks the lore or the game. And I think there are parts of the game that I'll be thinking about for quite a while, without any spoilers. And yeah, I would just highly recommend it. I personally think that it's also a suitable game for first timers. Like if you've never played Final Fantasy, the remake of 7 would, just like the original, would be a good place to start. I really do think that. I don't think that you necessarily, there's maybe a handful of parts that would be helpful. So have you played Final Fantasy 7 Remake? Comment below, let me know. I'm excited to eventually get to Rebirth after I finish 16. Thank you for listening.